Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, money seems to slip through your fingers? Have you ever stared at the ceiling at night, wondering where it all went wrong and if things will ever change? Well, Henry Williams felt the same way. An ordinary man, surrounded by bills, debts, and doubts. Life always seemed one step ahead, and he was trapped in an endless cycle of effort and frustration. But something inside him began to change. A curiosity, almost silent, arose amidst the chaos. What if the mind had the power to create a new reality? It was at that moment that Henry discovered the law of attraction, and, without realizing it, took the first step to completely transform his own life. This is a story about faith, overcoming challenges, and the power of believing. A journey that shows the universe always responds, but first, it expects us to believe. And before we begin, tell me, do you believe you can change your financial life simply by changing your way of thinking? If you believe so, or if you want to believe so, stick around until the end, because this story will prove to you that it's possible. Oh, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, take advantage now. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment below where in the world you're listening to the story from. Now, take a deep breath. Let's begin. Henry Williams was the kind of man who was always doing mental calculations, try to figure out how his salary would last until the end of the month. His mornings began with the same worry. Bills piled on his desk and cold, tasteless coffee. He found himself trapped in an invisible cycle where effort never seemed enough. Life for him had become a tiring race with no finish line in sight. Days went by, and each attempt to improve his financial situation seemed to collapse before it even began. Opportunities slipped through his fingers like sand, and Henry wondered if fate had already decided that he would never know prosperity. The weight of responsibility mingled with the fear of failing again. It was as if something kept him stuck in one place, with no way out. Over time, the lack of money began to affect other areas of his life. His energy seemed drained, his confidence dwindled, and even old dreams were pushed aside. Henry no longer talked about what he wanted to achieve. He only talked about what he needed to pay for. Everything around him seemed to scream scarcity, as if the world had forgotten to send good news to his address. But deep down, very deep down, a spark remained. A tiny piece of hope that stubbornly refused to be extinguished, even when everything seemed to say otherwise. It was like a silent voice whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a different way to live. He couldn't explain it, but he felt that something was about to change. It was in this restlessness, in this space between despair and curiosity, that a new possibility began to take shape. Something Henry didn't yet understand, but which would soon completely change his story. With each sunrise, Henry felt as if the world were spinning at a pace he couldn't keep up with. The money that came in seemed to evaporate into thin air, and all that remained was the bitter feeling of powerlessness. He worked hard, but nothing changed. It was like rowing against the tide. The more force he put in, the further he drifted from the shore. The days dragged on in a constant back and forth of overdue bills, broken promises, and sleepless nights. Henry tried to keep smiling, but the weariness showed in his eyes. Deep down, he carried a silent pain, the feeling that failure was part of who he was, as if prospering were a gift reserved only for others. Comparisons became inevitable. He saw people around him growing, achieving, living lightly, while he remained mired in debt and worries. With each success of others, a pang of doubt pierced his chest. Was he really born to win, or was he destined to be just another frustrated dreamer? This feeling of inadequacy made him doubt his own worth. Henry began to believe that perhaps the universe had something against him. Everything seemed to conspire to keep him in that same place, small, tired, and without prospects. But without realizing it, it was precisely in this feeling of powerlessness that the first step towards change began to emerge. Because sometimes it's at rock bottom that we start to look up. From a young age, Henry grew up hearing that money was synonymous with suffering. Those born poor die poor, his father would say. Rich are those who were lucky in life, his mother would add. These phrases, spoken without malice, took deep root in his mind, like invisible seeds that blossomed into fear and scarcity. He didn't realize it, but each thought reinforced a wall that prevented him from going further. As the years passed, these beliefs became absolute truths. Henry believed that working hard was the only way, but even so, it would never be enough to change his life. It was as if there was an invisible barrier between him and prosperity. And worse, he himself was maintaining it without realizing it. With each new attempt to start a business or save money, something went wrong. The money disappeared, the plan failed, and he always ended up back at square one. At those times, the old voices returned, echoing in his mind, "Money doesn't bring happiness. It's not for you." He didn't understand that the problem wasn't in the world, but in the stories he repeated to himself. These beliefs, accumulated over the years, shaped how Henry viewed the universe. He saw the abundance of others with admiration, but also with a certain silent resentment. It was difficult to believe he could have more when his subconscious whispered otherwise. But the universe has a curious way of working. When the mind begins to tire of its own chains, something subtle begins to move. And Henry was about to discover what happens when someone begins to question the truths they've always believed. Everything changed on an ordinary Friday afternoon. Henry received a phone call that chilled him to the bone, the news that he was going to be fired. His heart raced, and the ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. The bills were already suffocating him. Now, the abyss seemed even deeper. It was as if the universe had pressed the pause button, forcing him to face his own life without disguise. In the following days, the silence inside the house became deafening. He looked around and saw more than just walls and furniture. He saw the reflection of years of struggle, of attempts that never worked. For the first time, he felt he couldn't continue living like that. There was a mixture of anger, fear, and curiosity, the feeling that something, deep down, was asking to be heard. It was in this turmoil that Henry realized something. He was tired of repeating the same script, tired of living as if destiny were always one step ahead, laughing at his attempts. The pain of that moment, strangely, seemed to bring a different kind of clarity, as if the chaos were pushing him toward something new. That dismissal, which at first seemed like the end, began to sound like an invitation, a silent call to start over, not from scratch, but from a new point of awareness. What was once despair was now an empty space, and every empty space can be filled with something different. And it was precisely in this void that the first breath of transformation began to approach, without Henry even realizing it. Because sometimes a fall is the impulse that life needs to teach you to fly. One night, while aimlessly browsing the internet, Henry came across a video about something called the law of attraction. At first, he found it curious, perhaps even naive, to imagine that thoughts could shape reality. Yet, something about that speech captivated him. It was as if each word spoke directly to what he was feeling. For the first time, he heard someone say that change begins within, not without. Intrigued, Henry spent hours researching. He discovered stories of people who transformed their lives simply by changing the way they thought. He wondered if that was even possible, but curiosity was stronger than doubt. He felt a spark of hope rekindle in his chest, an almost childlike desire to believe again. In the following days, he immersed himself in this new world. He attended lectures, read articles, jotted down phrases, and began to notice a pattern. Everyone said that the universe responded to what one believed. This idea disturbed and fascinated him at the same time. If it were true, perhaps he was attracting scarcity with his own fear. He remembered how many times he complained about what he didn't have, how many times he had said, "It's impossible, it's difficult, this will never change." And suddenly, it all made sense. It was as if he had discovered the invisible code behind his own reality. The feeling was one of astonishment, but also of liberation. From that moment on, Henry decided to conduct a test. Nothing grand, nothing impossible, just a small proof that this so-called law of attraction could work. Little did he know that this simple gesture would be the beginning of a turning point that would change everything. In the days that followed, Henry began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not that timid hope that comes and goes, but a deep feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, things could really change. He woke up with a lighter heart, and for the first time in years, the future no longer seemed like a sentence, but a possibility. He began to test small changes. Instead of complaining, he gave thanks. Instead of thinking about what was missing, he tried to visualize what he desired. It was strange at first, almost forced, but something inside him lit up with each attempt. It was as if the simple act of believing was opening a crack through which the light could enter. The mornings began to take on a different tone. Henry noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The smell of coffee, the bird song, the light breeze coming in through the window. Life hadn't changed on the outside yet, but inside him something was already different. It was as if his soul was breathing again after years of silence. This newfound energy made him smile for no reason. People noticed the difference, and even problems seemed less burdensome. Henry didn't fully understand what was happening, but he felt that the universe, somehow, was listening to him. There was a silent conversation taking place between him and something greater. And it was precisely in the state of openness and wonder that he took the next step, the most important of all, to begin truly applying what he was learning about the mind, gratitude, and the power to attract what he desired. Henry started slowly, almost secretly, like someone testing a new recipe without knowing if it will work. Every morning, before getting out of bed, he would close his eyes and imagine himself living in abundance. He visualized his bills paid, a peaceful smile on his face, the feeling of financial freedom. At first, it seemed like a game of make-believe, but the more he repeated it, the more real it became within him. He also created a small gratitude journal. In it, he wrote down everything good he had, even the simplest things. The hot coffee, the roof over his head, the friend who called to see how he was doing. With each word written, he felt his heart expand, as if gratitude were making room for the new to enter. Negative thoughts still came, of course, but Henry learned not to fight them. He simply observed them and let them go, refocusing on what he wanted to see grow. He discovered that the mind is like a garden, and that he had been watering the weeds for too long. Now it was time to plant flowers. As the days went by, the practices became part of his routine. He no longer did them out of obligation, but for pleasure. It was as if each visualization was a silent reminder that he could choose what to feel, what to think, and most importantly, what to attract. And it was precisely when she began to feel this lightness, this certainty that something good was coming, that the universe decided to respond in a subtle way, but impossible to ignore. One day, while walking to the bus stop, Henry noticed something curious. His mind, which had previously only seen problems, was now beginning to find solutions. The same streets that had once seemed gray suddenly seemed more alive. It was as if the world had changed color, but deep down he knew it was he who had changed. He began to realize how much his thoughts shaped his feelings, and how his feelings shaped his actions. When he found himself worried, he attracted more worry. When he found himself grateful, good things seemed to appear out of nowhere. This discovery fascinated him. It was like deciphering a secret code of the universe. One day, while observing the reflection of the sun on the windows of the buildings, Henry understood that thoughts were like rays of light. They could illuminate or blind, depending on where they were directed. And it was there in that simple instant that he consciously decided to choose what to think. He was no longer a hostage of circumstances. He was the author of his own script. This shift in perception brought a new peace. Henry no longer needed to control the world. He only needed to take care of what happened within himself. And when he did that, the world outside reorganized itself as if by magic. It was a dance between mind and reality, between energy and intention. And as he delved deeper into this understanding, a new question began to arise within him. If thoughts have so much power, how far would he be able to go if he truly believed, even with all the progress? Henry realized that changing his mind was like taming a wild horse. Sometimes, old thoughts would return with force, reminding him of all the times he had failed. It was as if the past was trying to pull him back, whispering that he wasn't worthy of thriving. These inner voices made him doubt, and for a moment, fear almost convinced him to give up. There were days when he woke up excited, full of faith, and others when doubt paralyzed him. During those times, the old Henry appeared, the one who believed nothing ever worked out. It was a silent battle, fought within his mind, between what he believed he was and what he wished to become. But it was in this conflict that he began to understand something essential. Resistance was not the enemy. It was a sign that he was growing. Every transformation awakens fear, because it is ego fighting not to lose control. And little by little, Henry learned to embrace this part of himself with patience, without judgment. He began to see the difficult days as tests from the universe. Instead of complaining, he would take a deep breath and remember why it started. Each time he managed to stand firm in the face of doubt, he felt stronger. It was as if faith became a muscle. The more he used it, the more it grew. And it was precisely on one of those uncertain days, when fear seemed greater than courage, that the universe decided to prove it was listening. It was on an ordinary morning that something inside Henry simply changed. He woke up, looked around, and realized that, although nothing had changed on the outside, everything was different on the inside. It was as if a curtain had been lifted from his eyes. For the first time, he felt, truly, that life could be generous, that the universe was not an adversary, but an ally. The sensation washed over his body like a warm wave. The worries, which had previously weighed him down like stones, began to lose their power. Henry felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in a long time. He couldn't explain it, but there was a silent certainty that he was on the right path, as if his soul could finally breathe in peace. That inner change didn't come from a grand event, but from a moment of surrender. Henry stopped fighting against what was and began to trust in what could be. Instead of forcing results, he decided to allow. He let go of control, and with it came a profound serenity, the kind of peace that is born when we learn to let go. And that's when the synchronicities began. An unexpected connection, a chance conversation, small coincidences that seemed orchestrated by something greater. Each sign was like a whisper from the universe saying, "Keep going. You've got the secret." And with a peaceful heart and an open mind, Henry prepared to take the next step, the one that would transform his faith into action and his energy into movement. With a heart full of confidence, Henry decided to act, but this time in a different way. Instead of desperately chasing money, he began to follow his instincts. An old idea resurfaced. That small business he had always wanted to open but had put aside out of fear. Now, he felt it was time to try. And surprisingly, things started to flow. He researched, studied, and even with limited resources, took the first step. He didn't wait for the perfect moment. He understood that the perfect moment is when courage speaks louder than doubt. Every action seemed purposeful. It was as if the universe placed the right pieces in his path, one at a time. Henry realized that inspired action wasn't about acting for the sake of acting. It was about acting with alignment, clarity, and enthusiasm. He followed his intuition, and when something didn't work out, he no longer saw it as a failure, but as a redirection. This lightness made everything seem simpler, almost natural. Ideas began to float easily. People who could help him appeared out of nowhere, and opportunities that had previously seemed distant began to draw closer. It was as if the universe responded to his every move with an even greater one. And in that interplay between faith and action, Henry began to see the first concrete signs of change, small victories that seemed to say, "See? You always had the power, you just needed to believe." The following days seemed to have a different glow. Henry began to notice small signs around him, coincidences that would have previously gone unnoticed. An old friend contacted him with an unexpected proposal. An email arrived at just the right time, offering an opportunity that seemed tailor-made. It was as if the universe was whispering answers to questions he didn't even know he had asked. These synchronicities awakened in him a mixture of wonder and gratitude. He remembered the visualizations he did in the morning and realized that many of them were gradually manifesting before his eyes. Not magically, but naturally, like a seed germinating at the right time. Henry began to understand that these signs were not coincidences. They were confirmations. Each one served as a reminder that he was aligned with something greater. Life, once full of obstacles, now seemed to cooperate. Doors that had previously closed began to open, and the path became lighter. With a heart full of gratitude, he began to see each day as a dialogue with the universe. When things flowed smoothly, he smiled and said, "Thank you." When challenges arose, he simply asked, "What do I need to learn from this?" This silent exchange had become his new way of life. And it was in this harmony of trust and commitment that a new chapter began to unfold, one in which gratitude would become the fuel for their growing prosperity. Henry realized that gratitude was much more than just a pretty word. It was a living force, capable of changing the course of his days. Every morning, even before picking up his cell phone, he would take a deep breath and give thanks. He gave thanks for what he had, for what was to come, and even for what had not yet manifested. This habit, simple at first glance, began to transform everything around him. He noticed that the more he gave thanks, the more reasons he had to remain grateful. Small blessings, previously ignored, became great. Money seemed to stretch further. People were kinder, and even the traffic seemed less chaotic. It was as if the universe responded with invisible smiles to every thank you he uttered. Henry understood that gratitude changes the frequency of the heart, that it makes the mind vibrate in harmony with abundance. It was impossible to feel scarcity while feeling blessed. And this discovery made him realize that prosperity doesn't begin when money arrives, but when we learn to recognize what we already have. As the days passed, the gratitude journal became a treasure. Each page was a reminder that he already lived surrounded by miracles. He had just forgotten to notice them. Life, once gray, now had color. Fear, once constant, had given way to confidence. It was in this state of heightened vibration, where gratitude had become almost a prayer, that Henry began to attract even greater changes, those that would give concrete form to his new reality. As the weeks passed, Henry realized that the true transformation wasn't just in external circumstances, but within himself. His way of thinking, reacting, feeling, everything had changed. He no longer allowed himself to be dominated by fear or haste. He learned to trust in the timing of things and, above all, in the power of his own mind. It was as if he had finally made peace with the universe and with himself. Each day, he became more aware of his thoughts. When something bad happened, he didn't despair. He observed, understood, and learned. This emotional maturity made him realize that prosperity wasn't just about money, but about balance, purpose, and peace of mind. Henry was growing, and this growth was silent, profound, and transformative. He began to find pleasure in helping others. He started sharing what he was discovering, not as a master, but as someone who had experienced firsthand that change is possible. And the more he helped, the more life rewarded him. Abundance seemed to flow naturally, like a river that had found its course. This new perspective made him see money differently. He no longer viewed it as an end in itself, but as a consequence of the alignment between mind, emotion, and purpose. Money became a tool for expansion, not a burden for survival. And it was at this stage of inner growth, when life finally seemed to make sense, that the universe prepared something even greater, a gift that would show Henry the true meaning of prosperity. As time went by, the changes began to become visible. Henry, who had previously lived counting pennies, now saw money flowing in unexpected ways. The small business that began with fear and hope started to prosper. Clients arrived through referrals. Projects multiplied, and little by little, the debts that had haunted him disappeared. It was like watching a new chapter of his own life unfold before his eyes. He remembered the days when he could barely sleep, tormented by overdue bills, and smiled when he saw how far he'd come. What was once struggle was now learning. What was once despair was now purpose. Each achievement brought not only relief, but gratitude, living proof that the energy you emit is the same energy you receive. Henry began to find pleasure in organizing his finances. Money was no longer a source of anxiety, but of peace of mind. He learned to use it wisely, investing, helping others, and giving back to the universe what he had previously feared losing. Prospering, he discovered, was much more about awareness than about numbers. People around him noticed a change. Friends were inspired by his calm and confidence. Some asked what had happened, and he smiled, not knowing exactly where to begin. How could he explain that it all started within his mind, in a simple thought of faith? And while his external life flourished, Henry realized that true prosperity lay not in what he possessed, but in who he had become. One night, sitting on the porch, Henry looked up at the sky and realized how much he had changed. The stars seemed closer, as if shining in complicity with his journey. He smiled as he remembered everything he had been through, the fears, the debts, the hopeless nights. It all made sense now. Every fall, every obstacle, had been an essential part of the process that had brought him there. For the first time, he understood that prosperity was not a sudden miracle, but the result of small daily choices. It was the power of believing even when nothing seemed to make sense. It was the patience to wait, the courage to try, and the faith to continue. He had become a silent example that the mind creates, the heart attracts, and the universe responds. Henry began to feel a deep respect for his own history. He stopped blaming himself for the past and began to honor the path he had traveled. The difficulties did not define him. They transformed him, and that, in itself, was a form of richness. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Inner peace was his greatest achievement. With tears in his eyes, he silently gave thanks, not just for the money, but for the clarity, the strength, the wisdom gained along the way. He understood now that true change wasn't outside, but inside, where the mind meets the soul. It was in this state of profound gratitude that Henry began to feel that something new was approaching, a gift from a universe that would crown his entire journey of faith and transformation. It was on a sunny morning that Henry realized that abundance had ceased to be a concept and had become a reality. Everything around him reflected prosperity. His renovated home, his flourishing business, opportunities arising like ripe fruit ready to be picked. But the most beautiful thing was that none of this seemed like a distant miracle. It seemed natural, as if the universe had simply waited for the right moment to deliver what had always been kept for him. Things began to happen in an almost poetic way. An important contract was closed effortlessly, an investment yielded more than expected, and even people he had helped return with unexpected acts of generosity. Life seemed to conspire in his favor, and Henry understood now that nothing was by chance. He felt prosperity in every detail, in the easy laughter, in the lightness of the days, in the certainty that he no longer needed to chase after things. He simply had to let them flow. The fear of what if it ends had disappeared, replaced by a tranquil confidence that the flow of life is constant, and that those who vibrate in abundance never return to living in scarcity. Each achievement brought not only joy, but a profound sense of purpose. Henry no longer saw success as something individual, but as a reflection of the balance he had found within himself. He understood that being prosperous also meant inspiring others to believe that they could be too. And as he contemplated all that he had built, something inside him whispered, "The journey is not over yet. It has only changed form." With his heart overflowing with gratitude, Henry felt it was time to give back to the world what he had learned. He started simply, telling his story to close friends, sharing the books he had read, the visualization exercises, the gratitude practices. The sparkle in his eyes sparked curiosity, and soon people wanted to know, "How did you change so much?" He would smile and reply, "I changed my way of thinking." The rest followed. These conversations began to spread. Someone would recommend Henry to a friend. Another would ask him to speak to a small group. And without realizing it, his story was becoming an inspiration. He didn't see himself as a guru or teacher, just as someone who had learned to communicate with the universe, and now wanted to teach others to hear that same silent voice. Every word he spoke came from a place of truth. Henry didn't talk about theory. He talked about experience. He spoke of nights of doubt, of silent prayers, of moments when everything seemed lost, and how each of them had led him to where he was. His vulnerability transformed into strength, and people saw themselves in him. Gradually, he realized that prosperity also multiplied when shared. The more he helped others prosper, the more abundance flowed back to him. It was a perfect cycle. Giving and receiving became one and the same. It was in this new purpose of spreading light and awareness that Henry realized that his journey, one solitary, was now becoming a collective path, a movement of transformation that was only just beginning. Time passed, and Henry's name began to resonate among people seeking inspiration. His story, told with simplicity and truth, touched hearts. Many saw themselves in him, in pain and doubt, in new beginnings. He had become a symbol of hope, not by flaunting wealth, but by showing that true prosperity is born from within. His example proved that the mind, when aligned with the heart, is capable of moving invisible mountains. Henry no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. His greatest joy was seeing other people awaken, discovering the power that had always been there, dormant, It was beautiful to see how his words planted seeds of faith in weary hearts. Each person transformed was a living reminder that change is contagious. The impact of their journey went far beyond money. Marriages were restored, people regained faith in their dreams, and young people stopped giving up on themselves. What began as an attempt to get out of debt had become a movement of awareness, an invitation to see life with new eyes. Henry knew that it wasn't he who changed people. It was the message that passed through him. He was merely the channel. The universe, that's what truly created every miracle. And that kept him humble, centered, and grateful. And as she watched everything grow around her, she felt the cycle was coming to an end. But something was still missing. The final touch to the story, the one that would show the world the true power of believing. Years later, Henry looked at his own life with serenity that words could hardly describe. Everything he had once desired, peace, freedom, prosperity, was now part of his daily life. But the most beautiful thing was realizing that the true treasure lay not in material achievements, but in the man he had become. He was living proof that when the mind aligns with the heart, the impossible simply ceases to exist. On his quiet mornings, as he wrote new goals in a notebook that had once been for gratitude, Henry smiled. He knew that this was only the beginning of an endless journey. Because thriving isn't about reaching a destination. It's about keeping moving with a light heart and thoughts in harmony with goodness. He began to live in a constant state of presence and purpose. Each new day was an opportunity to create, to give thanks, to expand. And somehow, the universe kept giving back, with new people, new ideas, new chances to do good. Abundance had become his natural language. Those who saw him today might think it was all luck. But Henry knew it was faith. It was intention. It was the power of believing that life can be generous to those who learn to look at it with love. And in that awareness, he discovered that the law of attraction isn't about asking. It's about becoming what you desire. And so, between smiles, Henry realized that his story wasn't just about money. It was about awakening. And those who awaken never fall asleep again. Henry Williams' story is a vivid reminder that prosperity doesn't begin in your pocket. It begins in your mind. When he decided to change his thinking, the universe changed his life. And perhaps that's exactly what destiny is trying to tell you now. Everything you seek out there begins within you. Henry understood that the law of attraction is not a magic promise, but a reflection of what you feel, believe, and vibrate. And it was when he began to live with gratitude, faith, and purpose that life began to respond in abundance. The energy that was once scarcity transformed into light, into movement, into prosperity. Today he lives peacefully, but what moves him most isn't money. It's awareness, the certainty that he has become the creator of his own reality. And that same strength also exists within you. It has always existed. It's just waiting for you to awaken it. So, if this story touched you, allow yourself to believe a little more. Change a thought, be grateful for something simple, feel what is possible. Life always finds a way to reward those who choose to believe. And before you go, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below about what inspired you most in Henry's journey. Because who knows, the next transformation story we tell might be yours.